Okay. So I'm really incredibly proud and honored to be sitting next to Andy Allen. Andy and I got to know each other, surprising, must have been 10, 12 years ago, maybe more, when I had just started my very first label. And Andy was one of the few people in the distribution business who would return my calls when no one else would, and was kind enough to meet with me, and did not give me a distribution deal. Broke my heart. But as it worked out, things went okay for me, and Andy and I managed to stay in touch. I have long admired the company that he has built, the company that he runs, which is ADA, which stands for Alternative Distribution Alliance. I think it's the best distributor out there. I'm not alone in that thought, as I'll read you some statistics of the artists that are currently being distributed by ADA. Of the top 15 records at Newberry Comics, which is, one of the preeminent independent accounts, this week ADA has 8 of them. It's sheer dominance, really. Artists like Bright Eyes, The Shins, Arcade Fire, Interpol. Do you have the Streets? Streets. So it's really an incredible assortment of music that Andy works with. To give you a bit of a background, it's been in existence for more than 10 years, and it has fulfilled the promise for a variety of top independent labels, including Sub Pop, Beggar's Banquet, Touch and Go, Matador, Side One Dummy, Epitaph. Worked with artists like Liz Phair, Nirvana, Local Heroes Better Than Ezra, Sixpence, None the Richer, Death Cab for Cutie, Tom Waits, Elliott Smith, Postal Service. So it's a wonderful pleasure to have Andy Allen here, and we're going to learn a lot tonight, I think. Andy Allen. I'd like to ask Andy a few questions, and hopefully this will be kind of conversational, and then obviously open up the floor for you all with questions, so please do be thinking. Would you mind giving a little bit of your background? How did you find your way into the position that you currently are?
I guess if you go all the way back, I was initially interested in broadcasting and started by doing a pirate radio station. St. Louis, Missouri wasn't a lot of things happening at that point. You have to go back to that time period. FM actually was just beginning. We had AM radio stations, and they were basically all top 40, and nothing was happening. So, you had to. It's not much different actually than webcasting now. Really, either you did it on your own, or you came up with small groups of people that were like-minded, and you did things. So I started in broadcasting and went to a small community college out of St. Louis called Florissant Valley Community College. And they had a 10-watt FM radio station there. And it was kind of free form at that point. So I started working at the radio station and met some people, and ultimately ended up pursuing a commercial broadcasting thing. At that time, there were very few FM progressive rock stations, but there were several. And one of them was in St. Louis, and it was KSHE in St. Louis. But that group of stations were kind of like KSHE and ABX in Detroit, and WNEW in New York, and KSAN and I think that was LA or San Francisco. But there was a handful. There was like 8 or 9 throughout the country. And there were big FM stations. In St. Louis, it was 100,000 watts. It was heard in 3, 4, 5 states. So I went to school, did the broadcast thing at school, went into commercial broadcasting. Didn't have anything to do during the day, started working at a record store, ended up managing that store, kind of did the radio station thing on the weekends. Was hired by RCA to do sales, did sales for a couple of years, was hired by RCA to do promotion, radio promotion, did that for 7 years. They moved me to New York to do national promotion. So I spent 10 years with RCA. At that time, I moved over to one of the largest independents at the time, which was Island Records. And the first project I worked was Addicted to Love, Robert Palmer, and the second project I worked was Joshua Tree, U2's Joshua Tree. And we had a wonderful time and probably learned more about the business in that period of time, which was about 10 years also. And then left Island to come to ADA, and I've been at ADA for about 11 years. And the thing that intrigued me about ADA, actually, Island at the time that I was there, 7 years it was an independent company, and then the last 3 years, Chris Blackwell, who I think has been here before as well, had sold the company to Polygram at that time, and it, as things do when you sell, it had changed fairly dramatically. And I was looking for an opportunity to work kind of again with independents, and ADA is primarily a distributor of independent labels, and I found kind of a comfort level and have been there ever since.
Still enjoying it?
It's really, I don't know if you talk to somebody who's a music business professional or suppose, I don't know that you'd find anybody that's having a great deal of fun over these last couple of years, but I have to say we're having a ball.
Yeah.
And most of that is driven because we're working with independent labels that don't have something to protect. It's all opportunity to them. They're having a great time. They're being able to reach an audience that until recently was hard for them to reach, and they're enjoying it, and we like kind of acting as aggregating kind of all these underdogs, and it's wonderful, for example, to see Bright Eyes debut with, doing a very unconventional thing, which is to put out 2 records in the same week, vastly different records, and have it debut at 5 on the Billboard chart, and I think 10 or 10 and 15 or whatever it would be. But for Bright Eyes to debut in the top 200 in Billboard is spectacular, and I think it speaks a lot to what's happening with independent music now.
What do you mean you say they don't have anything to protect? I think that's an interesting phrase.
Well, the industry has been floundering, really, trying to figure out what to do with kind of unlimited burning and sharing. And as a result, it's changed the economics of the business. The business the big business was always built on, you'd put 8 or 10 things out, and most of them would fail, but you'd have one record, and that one record, and I'll use my example of Island. Island was able to exist and be this creative home for everything from Anthrax to Grace Jones to U2 to Eric B. and Rakim because of U2. And frankly, it wouldn't have worked if it hadn't been for U2, because U2 would come along every 2 or 3 years and put out a record. We'd sell 5 or 6 million copies domestically, and at that time another 6 or 7 million internationally, and that funded everything else. Right. Now that was an independent that was incredibly efficient at doing what it does and very focused and could spend a lot of time on an act like Tom Waits, but a major label isn't able to focus quite as much, and the economics for them really is dependent on that one big record supporting everything else. Well, if your one big record is selling 40 or 50% less than it used to, it means that the economic model doesn't work anymore, and that's what's really been struggling. So what you see now in the big business is mergers, downsizing, a re-examination of really the whole thing, mostly driven by lack of sales, and everybody has probably an idea as where the lack of sales are coming from.
This you mentioned Bright Eyes, and it's been something I tried to sign him many years back now. And ended up speaking to, I think it's Rob at Saddle Creek or whatever the fellow's name is, and quickly realized I don't want to sign this guy. They're doing everything they need to be. They don't need my help at all. Yeah. And yet some of the things that you just said about Island seem to be kind of similar to what they're doing with Saddle Creek. Yeah. That Bright Eyes allows them to release an awful lot of other kind of records that don't sell what Bright Eyes does, do it on their own terms. The fact that they can put out 2 records, different records, through your system at the same time, I can't imagine that happening either on a major label or through a major distribution system. Well, it wouldn't happen because the A&R guy would say, hey, you know what, you got too much material, you got to make one great record. Or there's not a radio hit here. The other thing that's remarkable about these Bright Eyes records, for example, there is no radio play. There are very little. Mostly it's college play or webcasting or any of that kind of thing. But you're certainly not seeing a Bright Eyes video on MTV every 10 minutes, nor are you seeing it or hearing it on your top 40 or FM station. He's getting a lot of press. It's a tremendous press and amazing word of mouth, and justifiably so, because it's some important stuff. But it wouldn't happen in a major system because the experts would have probably said,
this is probably not a good idea. You know, you're splitting your audience. They have to make a decision. They'll confuse. There's too much material. There's no hits. That doesn't happen in an indie system because there's nobody to say no.
Well, there are people to say no. You've chosen not to say no. There are certainly distributors out there, I know many of them, that are indie distributors that would have said, don't give us 2 records right now. And I'm certainly not going to mention names, but the fact that you said, well, you gave them the freedom to do that. And did it give you any pause, or at this point do they kind of say, you kind of just give them the room they need?
Well, I'll tell you what gave me pause. I thought that was the major battle, but then what we found out is that Connor, who's the driving force between Bright Eyes, also decided that he didn't want to put barcodes on his CDs. Barcodes are the little UPC codes, you know, the little things that when you go up to the register, they scan them, and that's what triggers the sale.
That's a good phone call to get.
He had decided that it destroyed his art, so he didn't want to have barcodes on his CDs, which would have made the records unretailable. So that was more.
Can I ask how you?
Well, we didn't put barcodes on them. We actually, they have those little what they call top spine things, that little sticky shit
thing you can't get off. Right?
Yeah, the stuff that you have
to cut. You can say shit.
Yeah, okay. You have to cut them, or peel them off, or whatever it is. We got away with doing that, and again, the experts would say probably that you can't get away with just doing that because so much of distribution and the handling of CDs happens at high speed, and CDs shoot down these things at like 5 CDs a second, and the barcode readers have to read them, and then they go off into these little things, and that's how they get out to distribution, and that's how they go to the stores. But somehow it worked, and I don't know of anybody that's complained yet.
Well, and Connor, I suppose, can get away with that. I'm sure there are some artists that might have tried to suggest that to you, and you would have told them, perhaps we need to keep a barcode on it. But
well, we came up with some other solutions, so if it didn't work, maybe one of them would have. But that was a little more difficult than the 2 CDs.
I can understand. Well, and it keeps with your mission statement. We talk a lot about missions and values in this program. Your mission statement is give indie labels a distribution system that merges the clout and convenience of a major with the marketing sensibilities of an independent. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Well, I'll start with the first part. The first part is 10 years ago when ADA was created, if you were an independent label, in order to achieve national distribution, you had to go and make a deal with a distributor that was usually regional, meaning that there was somebody that handled the Northeast, there was somebody that handled the Southeast, there's somebody that handled the West Coast. They were all separate companies, and you had to ship them records. You had to get paid by each one individually. There were no systems that told you how many they got, how many they sold, what was happening. It was really, you had to kind of paste it together. So when this group of independent or national independent distributors, of which ADA is one, I guess there's probably 5 now, it was for the first time an indie label could have true national distribution. 3 of these big indie distributors are actually fake indies, including ADA. ADA is owned by the Warner Music Group, 95% by the Warner Music Group and 5% by Sub Pop. RED is owned by Sony entirely, and Caroline is owned by Virgin, which is an EMI company. So there's a couple of true indies, but most of the big indies are actually affiliated or actually owned by the majors. Why is that important and why is that bad? Well, it's important because it gives us abilities to have scalability, which a true indie would have difficult times doing. It gives you some security in collecting money. It means that we get paid first as opposed to last, which most indies get paid. And it provides security for the labels, meaning that if we're collecting their money, they're going to get paid from us, which means they're going to be able to pay their artists. A true indie, if a big company goes bankrupt, is not likely to get paid, which means the label doesn't get paid, which means the artist doesn't get paid. That's the good part of being affiliated with a major. The bad part is some of the things that we talked about. Lots of obstacles, too much of we don't do that here, we haven't done it that way, so we're not going to start doing it for you. Any of that stuff that goes with being in the business for 25 or 30 years, 20 or 30 of those years, it working wonderfully successfully. Mm-hmm. Certainly this last 5 or 6 years,
not so well.
It's been a model that's been under attack. Right. But so that's the good and the bad. Right now, I'd have to say that we're in a wonderful position. you asked what's not to protect. Well, if you're Warner Brothers, for example, you've got 25 or 30 years worth of copyrights that now basically everybody is, making 10 copies for their friends, or, being shared openly on the internet on a worldwide basis, not even just a domestic problem, but a worldwide problem. And that's how you make money, is these copyrights. So if you can't get paid on those copyrights, how do you run your business?
Sure.
From an indie label standpoint, it's like, hey, if 50,000 people want my music, I think that's wonderful. They're not quite as concerned about how do I get paid and all the rest of it, because they're still in a position where they're trying to find an audience. Once you have an audience, you try to protect that audience. So you have the indies that look at everything that's happening now as an equaling or a leveling of the playing field, or opportunity to get to where the big guys are, and the big guys trying to protect their position. And it's not that much different even from a retailer standpoint. So you got little stores in the shadow of a Best Buy or a Tower. How do they all coexist? Same thing.
I'd like to step back a little bit. We have such a range of students here, some of whom are seniors and will know the answer to this question, others who may not. Can you give a thumbnail sketch of what a distributor does?
What do we do? The primary function is we receive the master and artwork from a label and manufacture it for them. So in basic terms, we take the last step of the creative process, which is finalizing the art and the music, and turn it into something that is carrier driven. In this case, these days, mostly CDs, though we do quite a bit of vinyl as well. The second thing is we then solicit that to the remaining stores that are in, and we only distribute in America, so it's just US based. We go out and present the music to those that buy the music for the stores, those people that determine what the stores carry. And of course, that's a presentation. It's not different than building a case for a client, or you're getting your day in court. The industry still puts out about 700 full lengths a week. Most record stores have fewer than 30,000 titles in their store. If you do the math quickly, you're all probably better than this than I am. 700 a week roughly equates to 36,000 titles a year, and the average store only carries 35,000 titles. So you can see that you have to make a case to be there. So that's the other part of it. And then the rest of it is actually just the warehousing, the shipping, the invoicing, the billing, rendering statements to the actual labels, and then, of course, paying.
So you act as a wholesaler, the wrong term, between the label and the retailers?
Yeah. The label determines what the price is going to be. We get a distribution fee. It varies per label. And then we sell it to the retailer. The retailer generally buys it from us at about 30% less than what the suggested retail is, 33 to 35% less. So, a $15.98 list record will sell for, I think it's like $8.40 or something like that. And the retailer decides then what they're going to charge the consumer. Right. In some cases, they'll charge the consumer $16.98, and they keep the margin. In some cases, they may charge literally what they buy for it, or even less, determined by what their business model might be.
So you're selling to the record store at $8.40, and you've paid what for the record?
Well, I haven't paid for it because I actually never possess or own it. The music is always owned by the label.
Right.
I have some manufacturing involved in it. I'm sure you've all read the Rolling Stone articles where they break out why is a CD $15 when it ultimately, raw materials wise, is 38 cents. So from my standpoint, it's 38 cents, whatever it costs to make it. Of course, the answer to that question is the vast amount of money that it takes to market the artist is what determines the price.
One thing that I think is lost on the population for sure, and unfortunately a lot of people in the record industry, is co-op. I think my contention is that co-op and what you mentioned regarding shelf space has far more to do with the difficulties that the record industry is facing than downloading. Can you speak on co-op a little bit?
Well, the term doesn't. I've been in the business for 30 years, and I don't know when it was actually cooperative, but it's short for cooperative. The idea being that we go to a retailer and say, hey, we'll give you $20 if you kick in $20, and we'll both spend $40 then, and we'll try to sell this record. Well, in 30 years, I've never seen anybody actually kick in. It's all driven by the money that comes from the labels, and so it's not cooperative really. It's really a subsidy for advertising. So, for example, how it may work is, and probably the best and most visible advertising you might see is the Best Buy Circular. The Best Buy Circular goes in, I don't know how many newspapers, it goes to I don't know how many people, but it's in excess of 70 or 80 million people see that circular every week. It has 10 or 15 titles in there. Those 10 or 15 titles are paid for by the distributor, which ultimately then is paid for by the label to be in there. It's a highly selective process. You have to make a huge case to get in there to be able to spend the money to be in there. And then they advertise the project. So why do you do it? Well, it reaches 80 million people. So if you've created demand for the record and then you want to reach 80 million people, that's one vehicle to use. A more grassroots example of co-op might be a listening station. So you go into a typical indie store, you put on the headphones. In order to do that, we've paid for the slotting, really, to get into the station, which actually pays for the technology that allows you to listen to the record. So in a way, it's really just us subsidizing for the retailer the ability to help promote the artist to the end consumer.
You said something important. You said, you can get into these programs potentially, and if you've created demand, then it works.
Yeah.
And this is lost on a lot of people.
Yeah.
In fact, I've run enough labels and worked with enough artists where they feel that once they have distribution, that's the holy grail. They can then kind of sit back and get the record in the stores. Is that true?
Well, we have a guy in common, this guy Joe Regis, and Joe Regis, we have a rule in our company. It's the Joe Regis rule, and the rule came from, hey Andy, I can't find my record in any stores, so nobody can buy it. And the answer was, Joe, you haven't created any demand for their artist, so the stores don't want it there, so nobody's coming and ask for it, so I can't get it in there. He's right, of course. You can't buy it if it's not there. The problem or the dichotomy in that whole situation is you can't get it there unless there's demand for it. So it's a bit chicken and the egg, but what it really comes down to is, and I talked about the stores before, there's 35,000 titles in a store, there's 36,000 titles coming out every year, there's going to be choices made. And generally what happens is the promotion, and particularly the pre-promotion of an artist, is going to determine whether the store brings the record in, how they display it, and how prominently it's displayed. So you earn your ability to be featured, basically. And there are some labels that do it wonderfully, and there are some labels that don't do it quite so well, and those that do it wonderfully do great. And those that don't are going to have to learn very quickly, or they're not going to have retail space.
Who does it wonderfully, and what do they do that makes it wonderful?
Well, I mean, in our world, and I'll speak in the ADA thing, Sub Pop, for example, is a company that has been around for a long time. They've had their ups and downs, obviously famous for having discovered the Seattle scene and captured that so well. But, Sub Pop had a very typical indie history. Did well, found some, truly life-changing artists, sold the company, lost touch with their audience, spent money excessively, made a lot of mistakes, nearly went out of business, scaled way back, re-entrenched themselves to the original ideas that they had for the label, and now are probably doing better than they've ever done before. They work way ahead. We get music probably 4 months before that record's in the street. Retailers get the music, writers get the music. They listen very carefully to what people say. They may elect after putting it out not to put it out. I mean, once they get a consensus opinion from somebody. They're very artist-driven. They listen very carefully to their artists, and they're really committed and passionate about their music. They do a great job. You mentioned Better Than Ezra. Interesting story, and slightly off the topic, but it's worth talking about the differences in just how music can be discovered. That in that case, that was actually Elektra found this band that had done about 25,000 units on their own in this area, right. Just kind of traveling, selling out of their trunk, doing things on consignment. And they actually signed the band with the idea, okay, they're not really ready for prime time yet, but let's sign them, put it out through ADA, give them some chance to grow. and we'll see what happens. And the very first thing that happened is that song, and I can't remember it now, somebody's going to know, Good.
Good.
Gets on a station, gets on another station, goes on another station, finally gets on K-Rock in LA, which is to this day still probably the most influential station in the country. And before we could even ship the record, it was a hit, and it was our first platinum record. But it can happen that quickly. It more typically happens in the way the Bright Eyes happens, you know.
Years and years.
This is the 5th record from a guy that's 24 years old, literally was starting, you know, playing, you know, doing stuff when he was not
13,
even in college,
yeah, right.
with a band of friends that just kind of hung out and did what they did, found an audience, and it just expanded on that audience over the years.
So what you've worked with, you know, between Bright Eyes and Cobain and Liz Phair, what is the essential quality of an artist?
You know, I think to be distinctive and somehow be different, and sometimes that can be limiting, and sometimes that's, you know, that's huge. The downside of that is there aren't many distinctive artists, and there's a fine line from being just different enough that it doesn't work to being just different enough to be captivating and you know, amazingly different from everything else. And if you look at the time that I spent at Island, and if you looked at that artist roster again, the one thing that artist roster had in common is none of that stuff was mainstream. Mm-hmm. It was never conceived to be mainstream. It was never recorded to be mainstream. Our challenge was always to take stuff that was very challenging musically and bring it to the mainstream. And sometimes that happened right away, and sometimes it took forever, and sometimes it never happened.
So, 2 questions. A, do you ever consider individual artists, or do they have to be with a label? And I know that gets blurred. And what does it take for either of those, a label or an artist, to get a deal with ADA?
ADA is primarily a distributor of labels, meaning that we won't partner with a label unless there's a label there. We are not a label. We just do distribution. We don't have the inherent functions of promotion or publicity or any of the rest of it. We do all the things that are the distribution functions that I described earlier, but we are not the label. And as a result, we've done very few label direct type deals. We did do a deal with a band called
artist direct or
artist direct type deals. Most artists know exactly what they want to put on the record, but have a very difficult time trying to figure out who the audience for that record might be. And frankly, that's what the label's job is. Mm-hmm. We need the label in place to tell us what to do, because we don't conceive of marketing plans. We act out the marketing plans that come from the label. There are some labels that are really artist-driven, and we talked about Annie DeFranco.
And OAR.
OAR is one that we work with, that frankly were so impressive that I broke the rule. And they basically, you know, were, again, guys that came out of college. They were originally from the Baltimore area, went to school in Ohio, literally toured Ohio, or as far as they could get away from school on the weekends and get back for class. They were superstars in Ohio. I mean, you know, you put out a record there, they'd put out a record, and it would literally debut in the top 5 in Ohio and nowhere else.
Yeah, and I tried to sign them too.
Young guys, smart guys, driven to perform, driven to do something different, broke the rule. We sold just a little under 800,000 records with them.
800,000 records?
Most of which was below the top 200, most of which is just them out touring all the time. Now, of course, they're out of school, they tour constantly, they've become a huge band in that world of performance-driven music, and it's all been done basically without a hit. And if you can survive in this business by finding an audience without being driven by a hit record, you've got a career. You know, if you've got a hit record, you have to survive that hit record and find an audience. You know, you've done a hit song. A good example in my life was Hall & Oates. Hall & Oates was somebody loves Hall & Oates here? No, I don't think so. So
I do.
I kind of like them, actually. But Hall & Oates didn't sell any records unless they had hits on their records. If they had hits, they sold platinum-level records, million sellers. If they didn't have a hit record, they didn't sell anything. You know, you got the other side of the coin with Annie, who you know, can regularly do 300,000 or 400,000 records. Bright Eyes, good example. OAR now, good example. Bands that can actually reach an audience without mainstream media, without a hit. that's a business. That's a career.
And their catalog continues. So, and I don't want to ask you to give proprietary information, but if you've got an artist that's sold aggregate 800,000, do you pay monthly or quarterly?
We pay monthly.
Pay monthly. So, what's a monthly check going to OAR from you guys look like? Or
well, it's whatever they sold that month minus my distribution fee. My distribution fee for those guys is probably about 20%.
Right.
So they're getting 80% of what the retail price is, which is a hell of a lot more than if they were signed to a major label and getting 12 points minus deductions and advances. So they're making a lot of money.
Would it be fair to say they've made over $1 million?
Oh, each.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Just trying to get some range of what can be done on your own. I think we should open up for some questions, if there are some. Yeah.
You just said that your distribution rate for OAR was 20%. What are some averages, and like what depends on what the percentage is?
When we started, and again, I was never a distribution guy. I was always a label guy. So when we created ADA, we were trying to figure out what just that question. What's a fair distribution fee? Well, you can't be fair and establish one thing, because if you've got a label that's doing $20 or $30 million worth of business, like an Epitaph Records, for example, and you've got Saddle Creek from Omaha, who before these Bright Eyes records came out, was literally selling records out of a record store called Homer's, and that was it. Mm-hmm. How do you come up with something that works for both? So we came up with basically a fee that's driven by volume. And it's really, the justification was, it's real easy to distribute well-known records where there's lots of demand. You don't, it doesn't require a lot of work for us to go out and present, trying to think of a real easy record to sell.
Elliott Smith.
An Elliott Smith record, right? Unfortunately, Elliott was gone. There was huge demand for that record. All you have to do is present it intelligently, make sure you do the right thing. It's easy to sell. However, to take a brand new band that's unknown, that is not sophisticated from a marketing standpoint, with an unknown label or a label that doesn't have clout or leverage in the marketplace, meaning, hey, I'll give you that if you do this for me, as a favor or whatever, it's really hard work. And for our organization, which is about 60 people, that's the hardest thing we do, so that we charge the highest fee for that. So we basically just came down to something as simple as possible. If you sell less than $1 million worth of business on an annual, if you do less than $1 million worth of business on an annual basis, our highest rate is 24. Our lowest rate is about 14.2. And if you can do $20 million a year, you can get to 14.2. Why do we get to 14.2? It's what Warner charges their labels internally. We didn't want to be less than that, because that seemed somewhat, you can imagine Atlantic would be kind of pissed off if Saddle Creek was getting a better distribution fee than Atlantic was. Atlantic does probably $350 million a year. So it didn't make any sense. But that's what we did. And it's based on trigger points. So if for example, if George comes to me and he's got a brand new label, I'm going to quote him 24. If Epitaph comes to me and says, hey, I consistently do $20 million worth of business every year, I'll give them credit for that, and then they'll have the trigger points beyond that. So they determine their fee based on how they sell. And I think that most of the industry now, at least independently, is doing some variation of that type of situation now.
You're well, I mean, you know this, but you're well below the industry
We
standard.
try to be low, not because we try to be discount, but we try to be fair. Our system is optimized to try to help indies grow. We want to be an accelerant to growth, so whatever we can do to help an indie along, that's what we try to do.
And I should point out, because Andy's too humble to admit it, of the indie distributors that he mentioned, he has double the market share of his nearest competitor. Other questions? Yeah.
You just talked about doing artist direct deals, and you talked about the reason that you don't do it very often is because the record label takes care of the marketing and the promotion and all that. Well, I am an independent artist, and I'm recording a record right now, and I'm also writing my own business and marketing plan. What else do I need to do to get you to do?
You have most of the components. The rest of the stuff is the stuff that you're going to have very difficult to, is the difficult stuff, is money and leverage. I get calls from like 50-year-old guys from Vegas that have millions of dollars, right? So they sold their software company, they go to Vegas, and they decide they want to become a dance act.
You sign them right up. Right?
So they build a studio. They spend $5 million building a state-of-the-art studio, which obviously you don't really need anymore. They spend another $2 million on a video that nobody's going to play. And the thing that they don't have is credible music, a way to reach an audience or determining what that audience might be, and leverage. So even if you have money, the one thing that an independent artist doesn't have, even with established independent artists or majors, is leverage. And what is leverage? Leverage is, I'll go back to my U2 days. When I was a promotion guy, the head of promotion for Island, the fact that I had a U2 record coming every 3 years meant that I could call any radio station in the country and say, hey, you want to do something with U2 who has a new record in 6 months? I have a record by this young lady sitting in the third row on the back. You're going to play that. Because if you don't play that, I'm not going to help you with U2. That's leverage. And the money, the unlimited money doesn't get you that. Now, relationships and expertise and being in the business and developing all that stuff, I don't want to downplay any of that because it's all hugely important. But it's the one thing that you won't ever have. Do you earn it at some point? Yes. Does Saddle Creek now have it? Absolutely. Did they have it 3 years ago? No. How did they get it? They put out one good record after another. They didn't make mistakes. They didn't get ahead of themselves. They didn't try to do stupid stuff. They literally just nudged their projects along very intelligently, and they earned everybody's respect. And now they have leverage.
They connected with their constituency very well, too.
And I'll have to say, and again, I'll use a Braday's example. Can I say fuck?
Please, yeah.
There's a couple of prominent fucks on the record.
Did you distribute Fuck? Fuck was signed to...
we actually distributed a band called Fuck, yes. Okay. Fuck is a problem. Fuck means that you have to put a sticker on it, generally. It's the PA sticker, the parental advisory sticker. Well, there's a couple of fucks on the record. They're on both records, actually. So, again, you can imagine the conversation in talking to Connor, who didn't want to put a barcode on his record, so you can imagine he probably didn't want to put a parental advisory sticker on his record. Well, Walmart won't carry records that have fucks on them. So we started going with this. We started the marketing plan. When we said this is all really driven by the label. We just act it out. We're like the foot soldiers. So the label started basically their upfront marketing, which in this case was a lot of press. We actually got a call from not the guys that supply Walmart with the records, but the Walmart people themselves. Why don't we have this record? And the reason was because we went to them and presented to them and say, hey, we're just telling you straight out, this doesn't have a sticker on it, but it's got a bunch of fucks on it. So if you want to buy it, we'd love to sell it to you. But if you don't want to have that material in your stores, we understand. They were so caught up, just as everybody was, in what was happening with that record. They were feeling it. And I don't know how you describe that, really. What did they feel? I don't know. The cover of every magazine, people in the store asking about it, clerks there saying, hey, are we going to have this? I mean, a large part of their workforce, in a lot of cases, is kids in areas where Walmart's the only place to buy records, and the kids are going to school and they work at Walmart. So they want to know.
Just like Connor.
Yeah, they all look just like Connor. So, did they have the record? No. Ultimately, they decided they didn't want it because they felt that they have an image to uphold, and I understand it. Makes sense to me. We didn't sell it to them, but they were feeling the record, which I got to tell you was one of the most gratifying calls I ever got.
Yeah, right. Other questions? Yeah, Brandon.
How does a record store become able to receive distribution from ADA?
Any store that
wants opens.
Any record store that opens that wants our music, we'll talk to. We'll probably want to know that you don't have gang connections. That
well, New Orleans is out.
There's some financing, because we're going to put a significant amount of inventory in your store, and we're going to give you time to pay for it, and we're going to want to make sure that there's the credit risk makes sense. But assuming that you're an upstanding citizen, and you want to, these days, if you want to open up a store, we're going to do whatever we can to support that effort, because there ain't that many people opening up stores these days.
Reed.
Earlier you mentioned about how you guys also deal with the manufacturing part Is that a typical situation for an indie distributor? Because I mean, I haven't experienced that before.
Some indies offer manufacturing, some don't. Ryko insisted that you were manufactured by somebody else.
That's correct. P&D is.
It's greater risk for the distributor because anytime we partner with a label, we take on a certain amount of risk. We increase that risk by offering manufacturing and then also advancing on the co-op. So if you're distributed by ADA, I pay for the manufacturing and then bill you back out of sales. And I pay for all of the upfront marketing costs, co-op, as George said, until they bill me back. So I don't bill you back until Tower bills me back, if it's a Tower program, for example. So I'm out there. I'm out in the wind. And again, the other reason that we do that is we want the label to be spending their money signing artists and marketing records. We don't want their money tied up in all this stuff. And why can I do that? Again, it's the major label thing. If I was a true indie, I couldn't do it. If it was a question of me putting money in my pocket or you put money in your pocket, well, it gets down to, we don't all do this for free. So I probably would be less likely to do it. But because Warner allows me and trusts me to make decisions based on finding emerging labels and artists and having a track record of doing so, I'm able to use that. And of course, to be honest, I use it as an edge. I mean, I don't, if there's something I want, those are the things that, if you're a label, that's what you're looking for. If you're not looking for those things, you're looking for the wrong things.
That's my biggest cost.
Right.
And what kind of numbers do you press? Is there a typical?
10 million units a year.
Heather, do you have a question?
Oh, do you mainly put your records in independent stores, or do you deal with everyone? Like, do you deal with Amoeba and places like that?
Absolutely. We sell very small shops. Amoeba is certainly not a small shop. And we sell Walmart. And we sell the Armed Forces. We actually even sell sporting goods shops. We sell gallery shops. We sell fashion. We sell DKNY. We sell anybody that will take our music and we think we get paid from it. We don't do that with everything we have, but we have been very aggressive in trying to find the place where people go to find music. And I'll give you an example of a place that you wouldn't normally think of. You guys know what Hot Topic stores are? So Hot Topic is a clothing store, right? I mean, it's in the mall. They sell clothes. So mostly black clothes. So they mostly black, spiky, vinyl clothes. So they felt that they had people that were coming in and they knew who their audience was, and their audience was into music. So they introduced a rack of records. CDs, I should say. They actually have vinyl there too, so I can use records. It worked. They put in another rack. It worked. They put in another rack. What it comes down to in a mall, most of these stores are mall stores, is how much space can you devote to something that you're only going to make a margin of 30% on? Because most of that black shit that they sell, they make 200 or 300% on. So when you buy a 9 Inch Nails t-shirt in there, they're probably making 150, 170, 180% markup. When they buy a warped disc that's in there from me, they're making maybe 20%. So they're not going to make that store full of records because they're not going to make enough money to keep that place going. Warped. Everybody knows the tour. We put out the disc. There's a little label called Side One Dummy that puts out these samplers of all the artists that appear on Warped. Hot Topic sold more Warped discs last year than Tower did.
What time do we go till?
6:15.
Oh, okay. Time for, yeah. Jeff?
Is that a marketing thing on the label's part, or do you actively seek out?
We seek it out. I mean, in some cases it comes both ways. I mean, there are some labels that honestly, all we do is listen. They come in, they do a presentation, they tell us where they're going to spend money, they tell us who the audience is, they tell us where the record's going to break. Most indies are not that sophisticated, and they're asking for a lot of help. So I would say that it's a cooperative process. There are some labels that really have a very good idea of exactly who they want to sell to. So in the case of Hot Topic, we knew about the store. We saw that they were experimenting with music. We approached them. We opened them up as a customer, and thankfully we've had enough material that relationship has been a great relationship. And now with Side One Dummy and Epitaph, Epitaph does a huge business with Hot Topic because again the audience for No Effects and Pennywise and all that stuff is in those stores, so that's a big store for them.
And it speaks to the evolution of music. It's not a music business. It's not just about downloading. It's finding new markets.
Well, one of the things that we found is of course, you've seen most of the record stores are closing. Shouldn't say most, many are. Many of the chains are having a lot of trouble trying to stay open. And as a result, we have far fewer places to purchase music than we ever did before. So you have to you have to either accept that, or you have to go seek out where are kids going to be to buy music. And all you have to do is go into a mall and go into a Sam Goody store and see that there's nobody but adults in the Sam Goody store, and you go into a Hot Topic store and there's kids there. And so if you're trying to sell music to kids, you got to put music where they go.
Let's get someone who hasn't asked a question. Yes.
If you're a label that's trying to get with a large distributor like yours, does it help to have a roster of smaller distributors that they've already been dealing with?
Yeah, I would suggest, I'm looking for, and the reason that we now look for this kind of threshold of $1 million is we have some pretty large labels in our group. And for us to be effective, we want to try to have the smallest group of labels that we work with all doing kind of the same thing in terms of scalability. What ends up happening if you don't, you'll get a few huge labels that dominate the system and a bunch of small labels that never get access to anything. So what we've always tried to make a conscious effort of is try to identify smart people that are going to come up with good music and have their businesses grow in a way that you can relate to them. As a result, it means that we're a little less likely to partner with a very small label right now. So the opportunities are, to work with a regional distributor, do something locally or regionally, develop a couple of artists in some catalog, show some track history, and then we always have a portion of our label group that is unproven things that we're frankly just taking a flyer on because we're just impressed by their ability to find music in a certain area or a genre or whatever it is, and we just want to take a shot.
Other questions?
There was
Yes.
one over here.
Yeah.
Do you think there'll be a need for distributors in the future with file sharing advancing?
I didn't hear the question, I'm sorry.
With file sharing advancing, do you think there will be a need for a distributor to hardware?
How do we exist with file sharing and burning? It's been happening for years. My business is growing about 40% a year. Am I being naive that it's not hurting us? It's obviously hurting us. When you talk to a retailer, what they'll tell you is people will come into the store, they'll buy the record, they burn it for 10 of their friends. It's what we typically see. You sell 100,000 records the first week, the next week drops off to about 30,000. What happens? Well, obviously, a lot of sales are lost to this kind of communal idea of it's a new licensing idea. It means that I'll buy one and I'll make 100 for my friends. It's not kind of a sanctioned idea, but it happens and it works. How do you combat it? Great artwork, tremendous loyalty from the fan base, sell stuff at gigs, keep the price down. So if we're able to, I think, make great music available, make it available widely, combine it with great packaging and great music, and keep the price down, it's the only thing you can do. If people want to steal from you, they'll steal from you. We're in a business where I think that the artists really make a connection with their audience, and if you can do that successfully, the audience is a little less likely to steal from them, I think. I don't know. Maybe that's naive.
Brandon,
Could you talk a little bit more about your 10 years with RCA and Island, and if that had any influence on you deciding to leave what you do?
RCA, typical old line, big business, major record company, owned by a conglomerate at the time. They owned radar stations that made more money than RCA. They owned Hertz. We were managed by, one time, the guy that was the president of RCA when I was there was Jose Menendez, who's the guy that his sons killed him, right? So, big business, you're a small cog, nobody has really a connection, constant turnover, no real passion for music. It's just a cash business, so it's interesting. At that time, there's no sharing or burning, so if you've got Dolly Parton or Charlie Pride or Ronnie Millsap or any of those things that RCA did well, you sold. It was a great business. It was cash. Elvis, all good stuff. Did you hear any new music? Were there new artists there? No. Was RCA a great label for developing new artists? No. Are they now? They're a little better now. They were
Dave
horrible.
Matthews helps. Right?
They were horrible back then. And I left to go to Island, which I have to say was probably the most, and I doubt if, there will be independent situations that will come along, but when I got there was 22 people there, and the company was billing about $30 million. When I left, there was about 60 people there. We were billing about $128 million a year. Wonderfully artistic-driven, small company. Literally everybody in the company could fit around one table. Matter of fact, we used to do that once a week. Hard to find that situation again. As I said before, the thing that I love about ADA is the ability to work with many of those kinds of situations and support them in a way that hopefully accelerates growth.
Two final questions. One, what motivates you? You've been doing this for a while. You seem to have a passion and enthusiasm for it. What you wake up in the morning, you got to go into ADA. What does it for you?
I've loved it because it's not a repetitive kind of thing. It's not a factory job. It's challenging from the standpoint of trying to figure out what's next. It's challenging from the standpoint of, did we maximize on every project? Did we leave anything on the table? It's challenging from the standpoint of motivating our employees to stay focused and know what they're doing. It's challenging from the standpoint of taking interesting music into the mainstream. I've loved every day of it. And I can't say that was true when I worked at RCA. And I doubt if, as I said, you'd find many music professionals these days that are in that position where they get up and they love it to that extent. And the independent world is, and particularly in our situation, because we have the stability and support of a major, and frankly then can kind of act like an indie. Can't ask for more than that. It's great.
To close, I want to thank you so much, first of all. But your opinion on the state of the industry now and where it's going.
We'll come to grips with delivering music in the way that people want to get it. iPods are wonderful devices. They're not a threat. It's a wonderful way, to get people to, hey, if somebody wants to invest $400 in a device and put 40,000 songs on it, how can you argue against that? That's great. Is it going to survive? My guess is within 18 months, phone devices will become much more interesting than iPods. The ability to get anything at any time. They already have a billing relationship with the consumer. The devices change out about every 16 months. Nobody has a cell phone for more than 16 months. So you're going to be able to put new devices into the marketplace with greater capability all the time. Any song at any time. Very exciting.
Very exciting. Is that a good way to sum it up in general?
Well, if you're a consumer, it's a wonderful thing. If you're an old line retailer and if you don't have a plan, it's probably pretty threatening. If you're a major label, I think that you're finally starting to come to grips with the idea that you can have a business that's not carrier based, meaning it's not a piece of plastic that you ship all over the country and have all the costs associated with it. And that's a major shift. So those that embrace it and understand it will benefit from it. Those that try to protect will have a tough time.
Andy, thank you so very much.